It was late in the afternoon when the sun started to dip behind the rooftops, throwing long shadows across the quiet streets of a suburban neighborhood. The day had been calm and uneventful. People were out walking their dogs, a few kids played basketball in a driveway, and the soft hum of distant traffic filled the air. A black sedan rolled slowly down the street, the kind of car you wouldn't look at twice. Behind the wheel was a man in his mid-30s dressed neatly in a dark blue suit. He wasn't speeding or doing anything unusual. He had just left work and was heading home after a long day. Inside the car, soft jazz played quietly on the radio. His shoulders were relaxed, and for the first time that day, he felt a bit of peace. But that peace didn't last long. As he passed a patrol car parked near a corner store, the two officers inside turned their heads almost in unison. One of them squinted at the sedan, then at the man behind the wheel. Without much thought, he muttered something to his partner and flicked on the flashing lights. The car pulled out from its spot and began following him. Inside his own car, the man saw the red and blue lights in the mirror. A familiar mix of confusion and frustration filled his chest. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but experience had taught him that being right didn't always matter. Still, he signaled calmly and pulled over to the side of the road. The officers parked behind him. One stayed in the car, the other got out slowly, adjusting his belt and straightening his uniform. His steps were confident, maybe too confident, as he approached the driver's window. "License and registration," he said flatly. The man lowered his window halfway and gave a polite nod. "Of course, officer," he said. "Can I ask what the reason for the stop is?" The officer smirked slightly. "You'll find out soon enough. License and registration." Without arguing, the man reached into his jacket and took out his wallet. He handed over his driver's license and then reached for another item, a badge. It gleamed slightly in the fading sunlight. The officer looked at it but didn't really study it. He gave a quick glance, then looked back at the man. "What's this supposed to be?" "That's my identification," the man said calmly. "I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." For a moment, the officer stared at him, then gave a short, mocking laugh. "You're kidding, right? You expect me to believe that?" The man kept his voice steady. "You can call in and verify it. I'm assigned to the local field office. My ID number's right there." But the officer didn't check. Instead, he called to his partner, who had just stepped out of the patrol car. "Hey, you gotta hear this," he said, chuckling. "This guy says he's FBI." The second officer, taller and heavier, walked up with a grin. "Oh yeah, let me see that." He took the badge, turned it over, and shook his head. "Nice fake. You print this off the internet or something?" The man exhaled quietly. He'd seen this kind of attitude before. Still, he kept his tone respectful. "It's not fake, officer. If you radio your station, they'll confirm it." But his calmness seemed to irritate them even more. The first officer leaned in closer. "You trying to be smart with us? Because that's not going to go well for you." "I'm not trying to be smart," the man replied. "I'm just trying to save you some trouble." That sentence made them pause, not because of what he said, but how he said it. His voice was steady, confident, almost too calm for someone who was supposedly lying. Still, they weren't about to back down. The second officer crossed his arms. "Step out of the vehicle." The man hesitated for a moment, then did as he was told. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stepped out slowly, and stood tall beside the car. His posture was straight, his expression serious but composed. "Hands on the car," one of them ordered. He sighed quietly, almost as if he saw this coming. "Officer, I think this is a mistake. Hands on the car." He did as they said. One officer patted him down roughly while the other kept his hand on his holster. The street was quiet except for the sound of the search, keys jingling, fabric rustling, the officer's heavy breathing. A couple of people walking their dogs slowed down to watch. A delivery driver parked across the street stared from his van. The scene was starting to draw attention. After a moment, the officer found the man's ID card, the official federal identification, clearly marked. He looked at it again, but still didn't believe it. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "From the Bureau," the man said evenly. "You can confirm at any time," the taller officer snorted. "Yeah, sure. You really think you can flash a shiny badge and get out of a ticket?" "There was no ticket," the man replied. "You pulled me over without cause." That response hit a nerve. The officer's face hardened. "You keep talking like that and you're going to jail for impersonating a federal agent." The man turned slightly, looking him straight in the eyes. Then you should probably make the call first. For a second, the taller officer's confidence faltered. But his partner jumped in quickly, saying, "Nah, we'll take him in. Let the station sort it out." The man couldn't believe it. He had been in tense situations before. Raids, interrogations, even undercover assignments. But never something like this. Being treated like a criminal for doing absolutely nothing wrong. Still, he reminded himself to stay calm. Losing his temper would only make things worse. "Sir," he said carefully, "if you arrest me right now, you're going to regret it. Just check with your supervisor." The officer rolled his eyes. "Oh, now you're threatening us." "I'm not threatening you. I'm trying to stop you from making a serious mistake." By now, more people had gathered at a distance, whispering, some taking out their phones. The flashing lights painted the whole scene in red and blue. The man stood still, the officers still surrounding him, acting as if they'd caught a dangerous suspect. The second officer started radioing for backup, saying something about a suspect impersonating a federal agent. The man just stood there, shaking his head slowly, half in disbelief, half in disappointment. Inside, he felt a wave of exhaustion. Not fear. He'd faced much worse in his line of work, but a deep, familiar frustration. He knew that no matter how polite he was, no matter how clear he made things, some people only saw what they wanted to see. The first officer kept pacing around, muttering under his breath, "I swear these people think they can get away with anything." The man heard him, but he didn't react. He just looked straight ahead, waiting for the inevitable. When the backup car finally arrived, the two officers looked relieved. Another patrol car pulled up beside them, and two new officers stepped out. One of them looked young, probably new to the force. The other looked more experienced. The first officer waved them over quickly. "Yeah, we got a guy here claiming he's FBI. Says he's some kind of special agent. We're about to take him in." The older backup officer walked closer, squinting at the man. His eyes narrowed for a moment, and then suddenly his face changed. He recognized him. "Wait," he said. "You're Agent Daniel, right?" The man nodded slightly, almost relieved that someone finally knew who he was. The two original officers looked confused. "You know this guy?" one asked. The older officer turned toward them, his voice tight. "Yeah, I know him. He's legit. He's part of the Bureau. You just made a big mistake." The street went silent for a few seconds. Even the people standing nearby seemed to sense something had shifted. The first officer blinked, clearly not sure what to do. "What do you mean, legit?" "I mean, he's a real FBI agent," the older one said firmly. "You need to let him go right now." The man didn't say anything. He just looked at them calmly, waiting to see how they would handle it. His heart wasn't racing anymore. He'd seen the truth land in their faces like a weight they couldn't lift. The first officer swallowed hard, looking from the agent to his partner and back again. We were just, verifying his ID," he stammered. "Verifying?" The older officer snapped. "You've got him out of the car, hands on the hood, with half the neighborhood watching. You didn't verify anything." The taller officer stepped back, his confidence gone. His hands dropped to his sides, and he mumbled something about just following procedure. The man straightened his jacket, brushed off a bit of dust from his sleeve, and looked at them both. "You could have asked for confirmation at any time," he said quietly. "That's all it would have taken." Neither officer responded. The silence between them felt heavier than anything else that day. A soft wind passed through the trees, rustling the leaves as if the world itself was embarrassed for them. The man took a step toward his car, ready to leave the situation behind. But even as he opened the door, he could still feel their eyes on him, wide, regretful, and full of disbelief at what they had just done. He didn't need to say anything else. The look on their faces said it all. As he drove away slowly, the crowd began to disperse. The two officers stood in the fading light, both realizing that their assumptions had just collided with reality. And for the first time that day, they looked genuinely speechless. The next morning, the town felt different. News of the traffic stop had spread faster than anyone expected. Someone's video of the scene had been uploaded online the night before. It wasn't the best quality, but it was clear enough. Two local officers yelling, a calm man in a suit standing by his car, and the moment when another officer rushed in to stop them. Within hours, the clip was being shared across town. At first, the man didn't pay attention to it. He was back at work early, typing up a report in his office at the federal building. He had already put the whole incident behind him, or at least that's what he told himself. But deep down it lingered. The disrespect, the way they had looked at him like he was a liar just because of how he looked. Around mid-morning, one of his co-workers walked by his desk. "Hey," she said, "you okay? I saw something online." "Is that you?" He gave a tired smile. "Yeah, it's fine. Just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" she said, shaking her head. Those guys were out of line. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his focus back to his computer screen, trying to move on. But the truth was he couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those flashing lights, those expressions and the disbelief, the arrogance. Meanwhile, at the local police department, things were far from calm. The 2 officers involved in the stop were called into the chief's office first thing that morning. The chief, a strict man with years of experience, looked furious. He had already seen the video several times. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he said, slamming a file on the desk. "You handcuffed a federal agent. In broad daylight. In front of witnesses." The first officer tried to defend himself. "Sir," he said, he was FBI, but we had to make sure. People fake badges all the time. "Don't insult my intelligence," the chief snapped. "You didn't verify anything. You made assumptions, and now this department looks like a joke." The room fell silent. The second officer, who had been the one to call for backup, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We didn't mean for it to go that far. We thought—" "That's the problem," the chief interrupted. "You didn't think. You acted on bias. Do you know how this looks?" Neither of them could answer. The chief rubbed his forehead, clearly frustrated. "For now, you're both on administrative leave. There'll be an internal review. You're lucky that man isn't pressing charges." The first officer looked shocked. "He's not?" "No," the chief said. "Apparently he doesn't want to make it worse, but that doesn't mean there won't be consequences." Both officers left the office in silence, their confidence gone. Outside, other officers avoided their eyes. Word had already spread through the department, and no one wanted to be seen siding with them. Back at the federal building, the man sat through his afternoon meeting, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He was just tired. Tired of having to prove himself over and over again. Tired of situations where calmness was seen as defiance and confidence was mistaken for arrogance. That evening, as he packed his things to leave, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it but decided to answer. "Agent Daniel," a voice said on the other end. "Yes, speaking. This is Chief Rogers from the local police department. I wanted to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. It shouldn't have happened at all." The man paused for a moment, surprised by the call. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. I understand if you're upset," the chief continued. "But please know we're taking this seriously. The officers involved have been suspended. I also wanted to ask, would you be willing to come by the station tomorrow?" Just to talk, he hesitated. The last place he wanted to go was that station. But there was something in the chief's tone, honest, remorseful, that made him agree. "All right, I'll come by in the morning." The next day, the air at the station was tense. When he arrived, people whispered quietly as he walked in. Some looked ashamed, others simply curious. The chief met him at the entrance, shook his hand firmly, and led him to his office. "First off," the chief said, "I want to apologize again. What those officers did was wrong, plain and simple. We've got a lot of good people here, but sometimes it only takes a few bad moments to stain the whole department." The man nodded. "I understand. I'm not here for revenge, Chief. I just don't want this to happen again. To me or anyone else." "I respect that," the chief said. "We're setting up mandatory training. Bias awareness, proper verification procedures, all of it. I'd even like you to speak at one of the sessions if you'd be open to it." He hadn't expected that. "You want me to talk to your officers?" "Not as a lecture," the chief said, "but as a reminder. Sometimes hearing it from someone who's been through it hits harder than a policy memo." He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll do it." When he left the office, a few officers nodded at him respectfully. Others avoided eye contact. But one young officer, probably new, still in his first year, stopped him near the hallway. "Sir," he said nervously, "I just wanted to say, what they did yesterday was wrong. Not all of us are like that." The man gave a small smile. "I know. Keep doing your job the right way. That simple exchange stayed with him. Maybe change had to start small, one officer at a time. Later that day, he drove back through the same street where everything had happened. The sunlight looked almost identical, casting the same shadows across the pavement. He slowed down near the corner, glancing briefly at the store where the patrol car had been parked. Everything looked normal again, as if nothing had ever happened. But for him, something had changed. The world looked a little different now, not darker, but clearer. He understood now more than ever how easy it was for good people to lose their way when arrogance and assumptions took control. At home that evening, his phone buzzed again. This time it was his sister. "I saw that video," she said, her voice full of worry. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it," he said softly. "A big deal? They almost arrested you." He laughed lightly, trying to ease her worry. "Almost doesn't count," she sighed. "You always act like things don't bother you." "But it's not right," he didn't answer. There wasn't much he could say. She was right. But he'd learned long ago that anger didn't solve much. What mattered was what happened next. A few days later, he returned to the station as promised. The chief had gathered the entire department for a mandatory meeting. The room was full, uniforms lined up in neat rows, notebooks ready, some faces curious, others nervous. When the man walked to the front, the room went silent. He didn't have a speech written. He didn't need one, he just spoke from the heart. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," he began. "I'm here because something happened that shouldn't have. I've spent years working with law enforcement, both local and federal. Most of you do your jobs with honor, but sometimes it's easy to forget that respect has to go both ways." He paused, scanning the room. Every eye was on him. "I was pulled over for no reason," he continued, "and when I showed my ID, it wasn't believed. Not because it looked fake, but because I didn't look like what they expected. That's the truth. And that's the problem." A few heads lowered. Some officers shifted in their seats. "I'm not angry," he said quietly. "I've seen worse. But it's moments like these that decide what kind of officer you are. You can let bias guide you, or you can let training and respect guide you. The choice is always yours." When he finished, the room stayed silent for a long time. Then the chief stood up and started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. It wasn't loud applause, but it was genuine. After the meeting, several officers came up to him, shaking his hand, thanking him for speaking. Even the two officers who had stopped him that day were there, standing near the back of the room. They didn't say anything at first, but when the crowd thinned out, they walked up to him. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, I just wanted to say, we're sorry for everything. We were wrong." The man looked at them, seeing the shame in their eyes. "I accept your apology," he said simply. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again, to anyone." They both nodded, their expressions sincere. As he walked out of the station, the air felt lighter somehow. The same building that had once felt hostile now felt different. Not perfect, but trying. Later that evening, he sat on his porch as the sun went down, the same soft jazz playing on his radio. He thought about everything that had happened, the stop, the anger, the apology, the meeting. It had been a mess, but maybe, just maybe, something good had come out of it. He took a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. The world outside was quiet again, just like before. Only this time he knew that silence didn't mean nothing was changing. Sometimes the biggest changes start quietly. One moment, one lesson, one honest conversation at a time. And for the first time since that day, he felt at peace. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. The story had reached beyond the small town. What started as a local misunderstanding was now being discussed on social media, radio stations, and even a few national outlets. Some called it an example of racial bias. Others said it was just poor judgment. But to the man at the center of it, it was something simpler, a moment that revealed how quick people were to judge without knowing. He didn't seek the attention. In fact, he avoided it. While people online argued, shared opinions, and tagged him in posts, he stayed focused on his work. He had an ongoing investigation, and that's where he wanted his energy to go. But everywhere he went, people recognized him. At the grocery store, a woman stopped him. "You're that agent from the video, aren't you?" she asked softly. He smiled politely. "I suppose so." "I just want to say thank you," she said. "The way you handled it, calm, respectful. It really showed people how to face ignorance with grace. He nodded, a bit embarrassed. I appreciate that. But not everyone's reaction was supportive. A few people muttered under their breath when they saw him in public. Others gave judgmental looks as if he had caused trouble rather than been the target of it. He'd seen that pattern before, people uncomfortable with truth. One evening, as he left the office, his supervisor called him in. The supervisor, a calm older man, motioned for him to sit. I've been hearing from the higher-ups, he said. There's talk about using what happened as part of a community training project. Something about federal and local cooperation. The man raised an eyebrow. You mean turning it into a lesson? Exactly, the supervisor said. They think it could do some good. You've already started a conversation that's long overdue. Maybe you can help finish it. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Part of him wanted to forget the whole thing. Another part of him knew ignoring it wouldn't change anything. That weekend, he was invited to a community town hall. The event was organized by local leaders who wanted to discuss policing and respect. The hall was full. Residents, police officers, students, and reporters. When it was his turn to speak, he walked up to the microphone quietly. He didn't read from notes. He didn't need to. I didn't come here to shame anyone, he began. I came because what happened to me isn't just about one mistake. It's about how we see each other. The room was silent. When those officers pulled me over, he continued, they didn't see an agent. They saw a suspect. That's not a training issue. That's a mindset issue. And it doesn't change overnight. But it can change. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of officers, community members, and young people. I've worked with good officers and brave ones, honest ones. I know most of you wear that badge with pride. But pride means nothing if you forget humility. There was quiet applause, then a few people stood up. The moment felt honest, raw, and real. After the event, a young boy approached him. He looked about 10, wearing a baseball cap too big for his head. Sir, the boy said, my dad's a police officer. He said he was sorry for what happened to you. The man smiled warmly. Tell your dad I appreciate that. The boy nodded, his small hand clutching a notebook. I want to be an agent when I grow up, he said proudly. That made him laugh softly. Then start by being fair to people no matter who they are. That's the best kind of agent. The interaction stayed with him all night. Maybe, he thought, that's where real change starts. Not in policy meetings or press conferences, but in conversations like that. Meanwhile, the police department was still dealing with the fallout. The two officers who had stopped him were under review. One of them had already apologized in person, but the other had avoided all public appearances. People in town debated whether they deserved to lose their jobs. The chief stood firm. They'll stay suspended until this review is done, he said to local reporters. No one's above accountability. At the bureau, the man tried to move forward. But the world wouldn't quite let him. Journalists kept calling, asking for interviews. He turned them all down. He wasn't interested in fame. He just wanted respect to mean something again. A few weeks later, the FBI hosted a joint workshop with the local department. Officers from both sides attended, sitting side by side in the same room. The man was one of the speakers again. He started by saying something simple. Mistakes happen, but integrity means facing them. He talked about teamwork, about the trust between agencies, about the importance of fairness. The atmosphere was tense at first, but slowly it softened. People began to ask questions, share their own stories, even admit their biases. When the workshop ended, several officers came up to thank him. You made us think differently, one said. I won't lie. I used to think like those guys. But seeing you handle it the way you did, it made me realize how wrong I was. He didn't respond with anger or pride. He just said, then that means it was worth it. That night, as he drove home, the road seemed peaceful again. The same neighborhood, the same street, only this time no flashing lights behind him. Just quiet. He rolled down his window, let the cool air in, and finally smiled. The world hadn't changed completely, but it had shifted just a little. Enough to give him hope. The following month brought new challenges. The incident had begun to fade from the headlines, but the effects were still unfolding quietly. Inside the local police department, things were changing. Officers were now required to attend community meetings, training sessions, and cultural awareness workshops. For the first time in years, people from different parts of town were sitting together, talking honestly. The man, though, had kept a low profile. He returned to his regular work, investigations, reports, field operations, but he noticed something different in how others treated him. People who once saw him just as another agent now looked at him with respect, even admiration. He didn't ask for that, but he accepted it with grace. One afternoon, he was called into his supervisor's office again. "We got a call from the bureau in Washington," the supervisor said. "They want to commend you officially, man, for how you handled that whole situation. They're sending a letter of recognition." He shook his head slightly. "I don't need that, sir." "I know you don't," his supervisor said with a smile. "But you deserve it." He appreciated the gesture, but in his heart, he knew the real victory wasn't an award. It was seeing people finally learning something from what had happened. Later that week, he got an invitation to speak at a police academy. The letter said the cadets had been studying his case as part of their ethics training. He accepted the invitation, knowing it could make a difference. When he arrived at the academy, the hall was full of young recruits. Fresh faces, eager eyes, and that mix of pride and nervousness that comes with starting a new career. He stood at the podium, looking at them for a moment before speaking. "You all joined this job to protect people," he began. "That's a good thing. But protecting people means respecting them too. You'll meet all kinds of people in this job. Some will trust you, some won't. But every person you stop, every hand you shake, every word you say, it all matters." He told them about that day, not as a victim, but as a lesson. How easy it was for pride and prejudice to cloud judgment. How one moment of arrogance could destroy trust that took years to build. When he finished, the room was silent. Then a cadet raised her hand. "Sir," she said, "what did you feel when they didn't believe you?" He paused, thinking carefully. "Honestly, I felt invisible," he said. "And no one should ever feel invisible in front of someone sworn to protect them." The words hung in the air, soft but powerful. After the session, many of the recruits lined up to shake his hand. Some thanked him. Others simply nodded, too moved to speak. He left the academy that day feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But the story wasn't over yet. A few days later, he got another call from the same police chief. "I thought you should know," the chief said. "The 2 officers from that incident have completed their retraining. They've asked to speak with you privately if you're willing." He hesitated but agreed. They met in a small conference room at the station. The 2 officers looked different now, humbled, quiet, unsure. One of them spoke first. "We learned a lot these past weeks. We can't change what happened, but we wanted to tell you. We're sorry, not just for the stop, but for the way we treated you." The other officer nodded. "We were wrong. You didn't deserve that." The man looked at them for a moment, then said softly, "You can't undo what happened, but you can make sure it never happens again. That's what matters now." They both nodded. There was no handshake, no dramatic ending. Just a quiet understanding between people who had finally learned something about themselves. When he left the station that evening, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in gold and orange. The same light that once shone on flashing red and blue now felt warm and peaceful. He stood by his car for a moment, watching the horizon. A smile touched his lips, not of pride, but of quiet relief. He knew the world wasn't perfect, but he also knew that sometimes one wrong moment can lead to the right kind of change. He got into his car, turned on the engine, and drove away slowly, leaving the station behind. The radio played soft music again, the same kind he'd listened to that first day, only this time the road ahead felt open, calm, honest, and full of possibility. And as the night settled in, he knew deep down that his silence, his patience, and his dignity had spoken louder than anger ever could.